Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Tayte, and bringing back Theo to the channel for another Mission Impossible review. And this is, of course, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, released in 2011, directed by Brad Bird, starring Tom Cruise once more as Ethan Hunt. Also starring Jeremy Renner as Brandt, because we've got to get into that at some point, which is going to be hilarious. Now I found out this information. But before we get into any of that stuff, sorry, I'm laughing because it's easier looking at this 10 years later. How are we all doing tonight?
Yeah, doing okay. It's incredibly hot in the UK at the moment. We're going through like a mini heat wave type thing. There's been thunderstorms this week, but yeah, ready to talk about Ghost Protocol, where Tom Cruise goes to somewhere hot, I guess.
Yeah, we are absolutely melted at the moment. We can't lie. But yeah, I'm ready to dig into, as we were just discussing 2 seconds ago, the guy from Lost for 5 minutes.
It is. I mean, yeah, I've never seen Lost, but it's one of those roles that pops up, and we'll talk about it. There's a young Leia Sadu as well, pre-Spectre, which I think catches a lot of people off guard as well as we get a bit older. But as always, we do want to hear from everybody, so please do comment below with your thoughts on Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the fourth film in the series, your thoughts on the direction, the cast, the stunt. I guess we're going to slowly move into that territory now. I'm talking about this is the one with the stunt, the Burj Khalifa. So we're going to get into all that sort of stuff. And if you want to find us on social media to find out about other videos, because there's a lot of things coming up in the next couple of weeks, go get us at Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and airbus.com/cinemasavvy. The link to Redbubble in that description below. But Theo, it's lovely to have you back. And it is the first Mission Impossible review we've got you on for. So we're sort of putting everyone on the spot with these. Like when we've done the Spielberg stuff, when we've done a few of your retrospectives, can you remember the first Tom Cruise film you saw?
That's a great question. It probably was Mission Impossible 3, I think. I came to them quite late because when the third one came out, I must have been about 9. So I think I probably watched the third one. I ended up going back and watching the first two after that. Yeah, I think that's probably it.
It's fair. Everyone's had different answers so far, and I think that's you forget not how old he is. You forget how young he was when he broke in the 80s.
Yeah.
That dependent on who comes on, everyone's saying different titles, which kind of makes it exciting as well. Whereas I think if the younger audience came on, they're legitimately now just going to say Top Gun or Mission Impossible, aren't they? You're not young, but I'm talking the young ones that are popping up because he only makes film every sort of 3-4 years anymore. But aside from that, what we're going to do, as always, we're going to go through the film. We're going to talk about some favourite moments, stunts, that sort of stuff, some behind the scenes, the direction. But we'll always kick off with the IMDb plot synopsis. Tate, what have they got for us this week?
So, the IMF is shut down when it's implicated in the bombing of the Kremlin, causing Ethan Hunt and his new team to go rogue and clear the organization's name. Just want to point out that kind of spoils, the first act of the film, I guess. That kind of gives it away because I remember that the first time, I guess going straight into my kind of memories of the film, the first time watching this film, which I think was like a DVD home release. I didn't watch this in cinema. I was really shocked when they blew up the Kremlin. So the fact that they kind of put that in the synopsis here for people who are searching up the film, oh, I'm going to watch this film. Oh, the Kremlin blows up. Okay. That's fine. I guess we'll see that at some point in the film. I was really shocked when I first saw it and went, whoa, okay. It's getting very real very fast. They've gone and blown up like a massive real world place that people know. Instead of just random kind of buildings or people, characters we don't know previously. This kind of puts it straight away. This is something we're going to blow it up kind of territory.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue as well because I think even talking the Kremlin, obviously 2022 is a bit different to how this could have been 2 years ago. And even that scene in particular, it's gone round quite a lot recently. If anyone's familiar with the certain July 21st double bill of Barbie and Oppenheimer, there's a lot of memes going around from the Kremlin scene. But Theo, over to you as well. Before I do mine, can you remember the first time you saw this film, perhaps 2011? I know you'd have been a bit older as well.
Yeah, I actually do remember. I actually do remember going to the cinema to see this and sort of jump into what Tate just said. When the Kremlin blew up, I obviously, when I was that age, I wasn't seeking out trailers. I wasn't watching them before I was going in. And you think they've gotten away with it at that point, and then the Kremlin blows up. So if they were giving that away in the trailer, or they were giving that away in the synopsis before, like, that would definitely take you out of, I reckon, the first 40 minutes. So I'm glad, however old I was then, 12, 13, I'm glad I didn't see that, to be honest.
No, that's absolutely fair. And kind of in mind, this is the first Mission Impossible film I saw. I didn't see it at the cinema. If I can remember it right, we're in year 11 when this came out. God, I feel old now. And I was in the era when I was really getting into film. I was starting to get bought Blu-rays for Christmas presents, which, you know, back then, it might be normal now having Blu-rays, but back then, like, and I didn't see it, and I don't know why. I'm trying to think what else came out at the end of 2011. No, Tron was the year before. And I picked it up on Blu-ray because I remember, like, again, started buying stuff in that age a couple of months after, and I think, was there a Pink and Eminem song that came out with this that got big, or maybe they came out at similar times? Can't remember. It was the song. I don't think it was like an official theme. I could be wrong, but for some reason, I remember that Pink and Eminem song being at a similar time. But before this came out, I remember, and this is the, maybe I'm showing my social media age now as well. Around the time I joined Twitter, which was very early in 2011, they released that photo. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, of Tom Cruise sat on the top of the Burj Khalifa. And I just remember being like, and this is before the "what's Tom Cruise up to now" type thing. This was like, why is Tom Cruise on the Burj Khalifa? And it was this really strange thing. And they're like, he's filming the new Mission Impossible. I'd never seen a Mission Impossible film. And obviously it came out and was a hit. And when I picked up on Blu-ray, I remember watching it and I was like, yeah, like I really enjoyed this film. I didn't go back and watch the others. I watched them all in the lead up to Rogue Nation. I'd pick them up at some point. But yeah, this is the first one I watched, and I loved it pretty much. I don't know if it's the one I've seen the most. I'd say because of age, it'll be this or Fallout, I guess, in terms of rewatchability and whatnot. But yeah, I remember loving it and kind of sticking with that. If we want to talk 2011 quickly, this came out in the end of the year, and it became Tom Cruise's highest grossing film of his career until the next three Mission Impossibles all came along, grossing $693 million at the box office, and it came the fifth highest grossing film of 2011. Which is quite interesting. If anyone's curious about the films that it was behind, you had Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which was one of the biggest films in history when that came out. I think it was third highest grossing film. Transformers 3, another one that grossed over $1 billion. Much rather watch Transformers 3 than the one that just came out. That's my review on that. Pirates of the Caribbean,
Review on that.
the fourth one, came out that year. And Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1. I've not seen that one. But all the others were all part of the 3D boom, which we'll talk about in a short while, because this film was not part of that 3D boom. But I mean, we're all similar ages. When we talk about these films in retrospect now, do we start to feel older when it's films we sort of remember coming out and whatnot?
I mean, I kind of remember this film being advertised, but yeah, it does kind of age you a little bit knowing this film is like over 10 years old, because when you're watching the film it doesn't feel like it's over 10 years old. You could easily a film of this quality you could easily put out like and place anywhere within the last 5 years even for kind of the stunts and action set pieces. I know that they get wilder and wilder as they go on, and I know that with the next two films we're going to talk about in the future, it really pushes the boundaries in that sense with kind of the stunt set pieces and what Tom Cruise wants to do, shall we say, on his bucket list of various different things that he wants to do. But no, it's unusual because, I mean, Tom Cruise doesn't age, Jeremy Renner doesn't really age as well. So without putting a date to this film, you could easily just kind of, say, oh yeah, this film came out like 5 years ago, and you probably feel, it would be a good guess. But yeah, no, it does kind of make you think back on those times.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think as well, the fact that there's such a big gap mostly between most of the Mission Impossibles, like there was 5 years between, is it 6 years between 3 and 4?
5.
And between like the rest we've had since as well, like that probably puts a bit of a timestamp on it for us. Or it's like, you definitely remember how old you were because of the gap between them. I think they have a bit of a cultural footprint in that sense for us, I think, from like cinema going memories, etc. and stuff like that. But again, exactly what you just said. You could, if this film was released 2 years ago, it would stand up completely. And I know you want to go on and talk about like the IMAX aspect of it, but that's the reason.
No, 100% with you both. And kind of sitting in line of it, I mean, let's get into some of the behind the scenes. And actually, put them both on the spot again very quickly. I know we didn't go on last week. Both your
Yeah.
thoughts on Mission Impossible 3, because Theo, I know we spoke about getting you on for that as well. And at the time of
Yeah.
recording, the review's not up on the channel. But the reason I'm going to ask you both about this is that they did ask J.J. Abrams to come back. And this was in sort of 09-10 time. Now, I've not seen Lost. I think Lost was finishing around that point. Star Trek had just come out. Super 8, I can't remember if that was before, or the Star Trek sequels, whatnot. But JJ couldn't return due to other commitments, so did produce this. I think Bad Robots produced all of them up till the new two, which I don't think they're going to be producing. I could be wrong, but just your thoughts on that, because the big talk last week was on the fact it was his directorial debut for a feature-length film. Obviously, he'd done TV, but the quality of that film, what he was able to bring to the table, and we kind of said that I use the term stepping stone a lot. No, like a springboard, sorry, not stepping stone, that everything comes after 3. And it's actually one of the reasons why Paramount won the 4th one, that although it didn't make as much money as the others, the film was considerably better than the second one. And they were all up for doing a 4th one. So just to you both quickly, what are your thoughts on that one? And your thoughts on, I guess, JJ not coming back before we talk about who else could have been involved?
So I guess I have to give a bit of pre-context to this. I've only seen Rogue Nation once. I've only seen Fallout once. So, pre-context to that, I've seen Mission Impossible 3 at least 5 or 6 times. I think it's the best in the series. I don't know if my opinions are going to change as I go through rewatching all of these films in the lead up to Dead Reckoning. But I love the direction. I love the acting. I love the set pieces. I love the drama behind it as well. I think it's one of the strongest plots to any of the Mission Impossible films going. It's a very, very well-rounded film. It's a very personal film as well, and I always love personal stories. So I really like 3. I'm a big fan of 3, and I think it is probably my favorite film as a kind of the thing that set up the rest of the series moving forwards. If they'd done another 2, I don't think the series would have survived. Basically.
Yeah, I'm absolutely the same, to be honest. I know I spoke to you about that already, George, but number 3 is a big hit for me. It just feels like they take that massive element of Mission Impossible that you see in the first one, and I guess the second one as well, which is sort of overblown, for want of a better word, I guess. And they just ground it in the third one, I think, as well. Philip Seymour Hoffman definitely helps that. I mean, to have a world-class actor going against Tom Cruise, for a plot, like you said, that's extremely personal as well, because you have Michelle Monaghan in there. It's a great. I absolutely love it. It's a bit of a thrill ride as well, I think. Apart from the devastating fridging of Kerry Russell in the first 5 minutes, to be honest, I could do without that. But from that point onwards, I think it absolutely sings.
No, that's fair, and it is interesting seeing the third one, because that heading into the series, obviously everyone was probably going to rewatch them, but I think the third one's got curiosity, and a lot of people were talking about jumping on that review for that third film. Obviously, we're happy to get everyone on all of them because they're all pretty great, except 2. Sorry, to the fans, but it's a pretty phenomenal film series, isn't it? So I'm going to try not to hype too much, but with JJ not returning, and Tayte, going back to that Mission Impossible 2 review, what do we say? John Woo's the only director that was never asked to return to Mission Impossible, which is very, very interesting based on some of the behind the scenes. But the other people that were involved to direct this one, Ruben Fleischer and Edgar Wright. Now, an Edgar Wright directed Mission Impossible film, I'd never considered that once in my life, and I now think it would have slapped. I don't want to compare it to Ghost Protocol.
Dare I say, Benji's character would have probably had more to do.
Well, and he already got a lot more to do in this as well, which is what's fascinating. Yeah. And it is really interesting that, Edgar Wright, I know he's been spoken about with Bond in the past. Obviously, 2011, he'd done Hot Fuzz, and the reason he didn't do this is because he was doing post on Scott Pilgrim. So it does seem like it was maybe a bit more so than they looked at it. Maybe it was an actual offer, who knows. But Brad Bird came on board, who contextually at the time is probably like J.J. Abrams, giving a TV director, not to sort of diss TV, but 2006 TV isn't the level TV is today. It's not as easy to make that jump, I think, from TV to film, being the biggest budget at the time in film history for someone for their opening film. That's a massive risk that paid off and launched the careers of one of the most successful directors of the last 15 years. No matter if people hate some of his films, more than one of his films, very successful career, and giving it to someone that had just done animated films in Brad Bird, who has done some phenomenal animated films, is, I think, an even bigger risk than J.J. Abrams. And I'll go so far to say, I don't want to say this is a better directed film, but Brad Bird just gets what this film needs to be. Every single sort of directive decision in this, it feels like, I'm not saying like Tom Cruise is overstepping the mark. He's the producer on these films as well. He runs with it, but it feels like Brad. Maybe I'm going to just sort of diss Marvel, but when a Marvel director comes on board, and it's like they've done a few indie films, they're not going to get much of a creative stamp. It's very much you follow the algorithm of what works for these films and do a bit of your own. This one feels like a genuine Brad Bird's come on board. He's doing this film with Tom Cruise, and I think it's one of the most inspired directors they've had on the entire series. We'll get into the script ever so shortly as well, because there was some obviously script issues. But for me, at least, I'm kind of curious to both your thoughts on that Brad Bird stuff. And I'll say this after: it's a crying shame that he's only done one live action film since, which is Tomorrowland, which I know did bomb when it came out.
Yeah. I was going to say, is that the reason why he's only done one live action film?
I hope not. But he did The Incredibles 2 straight after that, which I know is Pixar, and he'd done the others. But this is like you wouldn't think this is someone's first live action film. Like what he brings to just the way it's shot, it doesn't feel. I mean, at times this is a really weird compliment. It feels like a live action animated film. I'm not talking like Lion King, but there are shots in this film, and even when I remember watching it for the first time, there are moments of it. It comes across like an animated film, so it was no discovery to realize that that's his background. And hopefully he does get a chance to do more of this. But just to you both, what are your thoughts on his direction? We'll get into it obviously properly in a bit later, but I'm very curious.
I mean, he didn't really have a hand in the script, did he? No. But what he put on screen did feel like you have something kind of out there, extraordinary, kind of, but completely believable within the universe, if that made sense.
Yeah.
And just the way that he shot the film, the different selections of shots, it really worked. It really worked. It made you feel like you were watching a Bond film with kind of more high stakes, more action. And I do think this is an actual turning point as well, because Bond had come back with Casino Royale in 2009. Quantum was, I want to say...
06 and 08.
06 and 08. So then the next film along would have been
Skyfall in
2012. And past Skyfall, they tried to almost copy the formula with the Mission Impossible films and go more action-based, and the plot kind of takes a back seat and try and make Bond do massive stunts. And that's because of the influence, I guess, of this film. The first film to have a massive stunt and a massive thing, but the direction for it, for the action sequences and everything like that, it grounds you in that reality, but also you have these wild and wacky sequences that you completely believe. And I guess an animated director understands that. An animated film director is there to kind of take what's on the script, make it look believable within its own universe, whatever universe that is. Make the unbelievable look believable. And that's exactly what this film looked like. It was unbelievable things happening on screen, but it looked completely believable within the universe of it. And because he was able to do that, because he was able to kind of pull various different parts of kind of fiction and reality and meld them together, we ended up with a really, really fun action film to start off with, but also just a very, very well shot film in general, just from everything.
Yeah, absolutely. From my point of view as well, I think if you take a look at what's come since, I know you'll get onto those reviews with different people, but if you take a look at what's come since, this really set the tone. I think you could almost call this one, as much as the first three, there's a through line throughout all of them. Like, this almost felt like a little bit of a soft reboot for the entire series as well. I know we say that with the new characters that came in as well, and what they'd hoped to do with the original script that was there before it was chopped and changed and rewritten as well. But yeah, the way that they clearly decided to go bigger and go massive and way, way bigger than they'd gone before, sort of meant that when it came to 5 and 6, they had to push the boat out and go further. So Brad Bird made them do that. And yeah, I'm surprised he didn't come back for the next one, but I mean, what we've had since has been unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's a really good talk point. Actually, we'll bring up Chris McQuarrie for the first time in the series, which this isn't the first film he directed. He didn't direct this film. He will go on to do the rest of them, and one of the reasons why is that he wrote an uncredited rewrite that's not even a word. He did a rewrite on set while this film is shooting. They've got I guess the stunts ready. They know the gist of it, but he is responsible for rewriting this. Was uncredited for that at the time of recording. It's still the writer's strike. And once again, we've been doing it a lot in the last few weeks with this series. For those people that are unfamiliar, not about the concept of striking, but the importance of writers, that you get ghost writers, that you get script doctors. These are all people that are on set 24/7 who have no credit. And I'll be blunt, if Chris McQuarrie didn't direct the next 3 Mission Impossible films, I bet that isn't public knowledge. I bet that wasn't public knowledge until he came on board to start directing them, which is really interesting. And I believe the first time he even worked with Tom Cruise was actually just a couple of years before on Valkyrie, if anyone remembers that, directed by Bryan Singer. And he worked with him back in the 90s on, Usual Suspects. So, Chris McQuarrie's got a history within the industry, but knowing Tom Cruise before this as well. And it is interesting. And I think kind of segueing that with the Brad Bird stuff, kind of take with what you said too, that, he does a fine job at directing what the material is, what's in front of him. And I think he doesn't necessarily get the credit he deserves. And it is only because I think Chris McQuarrie has gone on to do the next few that Brad Bird didn't have the chance, because I'm also with you. This is also partially a soft reboot. Although 3 is that springboard, as I mentioned, this is the one where, it's the one with the first big stunt. It's the one where the opening titles are going to show the rest of the film in a very different way. And there's all these little things where they sort of, I'm trying to think of a series that might have done similar, but they sort of nailed it with this one to then move forward knowing this is what we're going to do a bit more of down the line. And
a bit like a blueprint, I guess, for them to just
blueprint.
follow, change a little bit all the way.
Like a Goldfinger type, right? That Bond clicked on that third film. And this is the fourth one. You had From Russia with Love, you had your Mission Impossible 3, your very different one. And then they've got it bang on right on this one. And that's where they're going to use it moving forward. And when we mentioned earlier with that box office, the audiences followed, the audiences turned up. They went to the cinema, and kind of a big thing with this, actually, we mentioned 3D, we'll talk about this too. The 3D boom, one thing I'll definitely remember from all the years is every film seemed to come out in 3D. I won't lie, I was fully in on the 3D hype. I had a 3D TV, I had a 3D Blu-ray player, I think the PS3 was back, it was PS3 still. And I quite liked watching films in 3D. Tate's got his glasses on now. And it's quite incredible, sort of 10 years later, not saying it's dead. Avatar just came out and made, over $2 billion again with using 3D. But in terms of a format, Brad Bird rejected shooting in 3D. And I'd say in the year 2011, that probably cost the studio 100 mil extra, because all those films that were hitting $1 billion, flying past $1 billion, they were getting there thanks to the boom of 3D, inflation on prices, etc., etc., etc. So really, that box office number is remarkable in its own right, that it could have been more. And in line with that, 2011, when this film comes out, 2008, you've got The Dark Knight, which is the first film being used for IMAX. IMAX isn't what it is now. Back then, they shot 30 minutes of footage for this film on IMAX camera. And from people I've seen online, like the Fuse podcast, we're doing a rewatch the other day. A lot of people talk about when they're in the cinema, and I know that Hunger Games gets all the credit for this. But in the second Hunger Games, when she comes at the water and the IMAX ratio opens up, they do this for the Burj Khalifa when the camera slowly pans over and you get the drop. This has instantly become a film I'd want to see on IMAX if I had the chance. Like, if there was 10 films that have been done on IMAX I hadn't seen, this would be near the top, because I would love to see that sequence with those cameras. And again, I think it's films like this which really pushed IMAX, and actually with the release of this has reminded me, I did want to watch this film at the cinema in the UK, because at the time, the only way to watch The Dark Knight Rises prologue was to go to the Mission Impossible IMAX screenings, to which there was only London, and I was 15, so obviously wasn't going to go to London to watch films. Had no money. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you.
I have a quick question, because seeing that Brad Bird rejected the idea of shooting in 3D, you look at some of the shots in the film, some of the things that would have been written into the script. You look at it and you think, Christ, a lot of the shots in this film, or a lot of the things from the script, kind of call for 3D sequences. And I'm sure when Tom Cruise kind of suggested, I want to climb the Burj Khalifa, the studio is probably going, absolutely yes, and we'll have that scene in 3D. Not having that scene in IMAX or having that scene in any other format. So it's really interesting that kind of he chose not to shoot in 3D and really kind of rejected that and went, no, we're going to go IMAX for 30 minutes of footage instead. Because for a studio, especially like you said, at that time where 3D films were massive, they were pulling in so much money and stuff like that. A lot of these shot selections in this film would happily work in 3D, even in their current format. But I'm sure that kind of the writers as well would have at least considered how it was filmed and how it was kind of presented. And I'm sure that they would have been thinking in the initial writing process, we're going to want these scenes in 3D. We're going to want this kind of presented in this way, and kind of put those drafts forward towards the direction team.
Yeah, and whoever pitched that to Tom Cruise in the end to ditch the 3D and go with IMAX, it's clearly worked, because he's gone on to be an absolute ambassador for IMAX.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of with the IMAX stuff as well, it needed more than just Christopher Nolan, I think, pushing that boundary. That, Tron Legacy, I spoke before on the channel about, that was shot in IMAX format, in IMAX ratio. It was great at that experience, but it wasn't the juggernaut hit. You needed to continuously have those films doing it. And I think Dark Knight Rises was probably the first big commercial IMAX release that I remember. That's when more people started going to IMAXs, because they'd shot like 50 minutes of the film in IMAX for that one. You had the famous American football scene. And it is really interesting that, even the Tom Cruise of today, right, where he's pushing practical stunts, he's pushing practical effects, he's pushing the big screen experience. Ironically, we're talking Mission Impossible and IMAX, not to pay attention to tabloid stuff, but if anyone's seen the reports for last week, that Oppenheimer's booked the IMAX screens for 3 weeks exclusively, and they're not necessarily too happy that Oppenheimer's done that. It's quite interesting.
But I wanted to see Barbie in IMAX.
It feels like a bit of an oversight from Tom Cruise. Like, how did he let that happen? Is my take on it, to be honest. Surely he would be across that.
Where I think this is genuine, I think it's been blown out of proportion by the media, because it's always really easy to put a Tom Cruise is fuming at inserts.
Yeah.
And I think
100%.
what's happened is Oppenheimer had the big screens for a week, guaranteed, like Mission Impossible. The Marvels was going to come out on 28th of July. Marvel had it booked for 2 weeks, which I think I was pissed off about when I read that, because I thought, who's going to want to watch the Marvels in IMAX over Oppenheimer in IMAX? Let's be honest. And as soon as the Marvels moved, we said it on the Blockbuster preview episode, that we thought, it's just going to be Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer sharing it after Oppenheimer's had a week. But Nolan's come in clutch. He's got the 3 week. I mean, surely they'll negotiate something. Although, part of me is like, give Mission Impossible 4DX. But, the more I hear about this nuclear bomb in Oppenheimer, that Nolan wants us to feel the heat of a nuclear bomb. I will watch it in 4DX. just if there really is something happening that we don't know about, that it might actually be not a cinema, but actually a nuclear test site. But it is interesting.
That might be genuinely the first film that I watch in 4DX.
I will do the repeat viewing in 4DX if I need to. That's wait 3 hours to get the last minute that you want, probably. But kind of funny, and maybe that also explains why Tom Cruise is annoyed. Now we've actually spoke about this, that maybe we know how important Top Gun Maverick was to the cinemas last year, what that's done for the industry, but really Tom Cruise is pushing the IMAX experience again. Maybe he also feels a bit of, not ownership, but if these stories are to be believed, maybe he's in that same vein that, hold on, I've been pushing this format too. How come it's 3 weeks for that one? I would argue that Nolan and IMAX is probably preferential, that it was shot with new cameras. But that's speculation aside for later on in July. But it is interesting.
I think yeah. From Tom Cruise's point of view as well, I guess if you're just going off in terms of box office, I think he probably knows this is the first chance for a Mission Impossible film to gross $1 billion. I think that's probably where his mindset's at, because straight off the back of Top Gun Maverick, with Cruise right front and center of people's minds, like, that's there for the taking, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And it is going to be interesting. And I think as it gets into August, they'll both be on. People will watch both. And one of them is a 3 hour rated R film, which is maybe tougher to sell than I mean, this is still 2.5 hours Dead Reckoning Part 1, isn't it? But that's not going to be rated R, which is going to make it more accessible, I guess, to a bigger audience if need be. So I feel like something's been blown up out of nothing. There's some truth, and maybe there'll be some 50-50, who knows? But we'll find out in August time. But just carrying talking Brad Bird, very quickly. I'm not going to sit here and touch upon scenes, but the one thing I just want to talk about the animation style. This one's very funny. Not like oh, this is a comedy, haha. More of a lot of things go wrong for the characters that lead to certain scenarios and situations that there is comic relief to be made from it. And kind of with Brad Broach's, approach as a director, I'm not sort of generalizing animation, but with his background of Pixar, right? Sort of family-friendly films as they are. They can't be too adult. Of course, there can be adult references in those. I think he'd done Iron Giant, Incredibles, Ratatouille at this point, and I think he'd been an animator previously. I could be wrong. There's a lot of sequences in this which I find amusing, and one of the things I read behind the scenes was that every single device, gadget, whatever you want to call it, when they approached this film, Brad Bird said, "I want every single device to fail in the film so that our characters are never just going to be able to get out of a situation." And kind of when I read that after, I did think in my mind, I was like, did that actually happen in this film? And it actually did. That every single thing, even the great projector screen, it starts glitching eventually where they get caught. It was all built up really well for the masks. Again, one of the, not necessarily a loophole of the Mission Impossible films. They're part of the series through and through. The mask fails when they've built up to that. But then you get the sudden tension of, now we need to do the Burj Khalifa scene. That almost every big moment in this film comes out of a mistake of something else. And I think it's actually a really fascinating approach. And that's maybe why, saying this out loud, this film feels somewhat more tense than the others. Even though 1 and 3, you could argue, are more dramas. This one feels like there are stakes because we're spending time with them. We're seeing things go wrong for them to then rectify. And I think it's a really interesting approach to the Mission Impossible films. And I don't know if they've done it since where every gadget fails. Probably not. But also the gadgets in this, they're so inventive. And the obvious one, the corridor, when Simon Pegg's face pops up, that's like watching a live action Pixar thing, isn't it? Just that split second, the face up to the camera. There's these dotted bits of comedy that I think, again, Brad Bird, through his previous films, he knows that people will find it entertaining. And I just think it helps divert that this isn't not too serious. It's still a pretty serious film. But you get those light, hard moments, which I don't think you've had in a couple of the other films. But am I alone in thinking that?
No, I completely agree with you. I'd say that, because the gadgets do fail over and over again, it does up the stakes and, it does make it a little bit more intense. I think also the fact that this film is Ghost Protocol, they don't have IMF hunting them down or active or anything at this stage. Like, they're truly on their own. It is just a single team trying to clear the name and a single team trying to kind of pursue and do it. Which kind of ups the stakes as well, because previously they've always had the backing of something, or, at least in the first film, there's at least a small team that, he can kind of rely on and get his kind of head around. With this, it's pure isolation. They are down to, what they've got, and it's world-ending. Like, truly world-ending. Not like Mission Impossible 2, well, she could just walk off the cliff and then the virus doesn't get out kind of world-ending. It's more of kind of like, it is everything is against them. The nuclear codes are going to be in the wrong hands pretty soon. We have to intercept. And then it's the whole, well, Christ, they got someone to check it. We've got to give them the actual codes. We've basically got to lose here to win. Everything in this film, and I know the question's going to be coming up in a second, isn't it a possible mission? Kind of. I mean, I think from 3 onwards, you could easily say that most of the missions are impossible. Like, they do get procedurally harder and harder to complete and go through. And there's so many different things in this film that need to go right for the team to make it, possible. And even if they do go right, like, things still go wrong and devices and gadgets don't quite work in the way that they want them to. So, yeah, it does get more and more impossible. And it's a really fun detail that, at least, the devices fail at some point during the film. And that does indeed increase the tension.
Yeah, definitely. I think it balances that world-ending sort of Mission Impossible blueprint that we see definitely from this one throughout as well, with the sort of quippiness. And I think that's what Brad Bird brings into it as well. Especially, I guess this is the first one that properly leans on Simon Pegg.
Yeah.
So properly leaning on his comedic timing is where I think most of the laughs come from as well.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And we'll talk about the team in a second as well. But yeah, let's talk that story. So we sort of spoke there about world ending. As you said, Tate, the second one, yeah, a pandemic could happen, but she's standing near the cliff, and you watch that film again, and it doesn't feel like there's ever it maybe because it's meant to
There's
be
no threat.
personal, maybe because
Yeah.
not that it has to be globetrotting to be a threat, but it's all set in Sydney, isn't it? It never feels like there's a global thing that could happen here. Whereas this one, you're going from places. I mean, blowing up the Kremlin for a start is probably ballsy. I don't know how on earth. I mean, I don't know if you need permission to do that in a film, but that's the sort of thing where I can imagine a certain country being furious about. But then they're going to places like India, they're going to Dubai, of course, America as well, and it's a really interesting approach that it feels like that we're going around the world. This is for the mission now, and even the IMF being shut. One thing sort of people joke about is that he gets disavowed in every film. Same thing to a lot of Daniel Craig James Bond films, I guess we can say too. And having the organization shut down, I think, just gives it that bit more freedom. Where again, for the Burj Khalifa stunt, Simon Pegg's like, if we weren't shut down, yeah, we'd have done this in 10 seconds. But we are, and you're gonna have to go out there, and it's a great way, I think, for them to up the stakes for those big moments too. It's not, not that I'm going to slag off Rogue Nation, but the big moment of Rogue Nation, the plane scene, is the opening, which I think works in its own right. And that was all the marketing. But the Burj Khalifa, yeah, it's not the final act, but it's going to happen, and they build up to it really well. It's not like, oh, we just want to climb this tower, so we've come here. It might have been in pre-production, but the story is engineered around why he has to go and do that. And I think it's those moments that work when the comedy comes into it. Again, credit's got to go to the writing, to the cast, the performance. But for me, it feels like the first impossible mission in the sense of a global scale. The first film, pretty much, it's that very personal, this is Ethan Hunt's film. This is his story of why it's Mission Impossible for him, maybe not the others. And I think this succeeds. And even getting to the ending, when you've got the countdown, I love the fact that, it's already been a bit tense. Let's not have him miraculously slam the button with a second to go. It's, 16 seconds? And then it's they've not plugged in the hard drive yet, they're not sorted. And then you've got that extra 10, 15 seconds of, are they actually going to do it? And even having the missile hit the building, but close just in time, I think, I mean, I don't want to say does that happen in films often. It's a very cliched thing to stop the bomb before it goes off, but I can't tell many films where, it's at least hit a building at the end and just bounced off and gone somewhere else. I think again, that comes into the Brad Bird side of things, that everything's got to go wrong, even for the villains. And I do think the story, it is in the story of maybe not character arc, the story is not the best, but the overarching story, I think this is one of the best ones. And as you said, it's the blueprint of what's to come for the series.
No, I completely agree. And it's a fascinating point that, even at the very, very end, that kind of like false hope of, okay, he slammed the button, there's loads of time left. And then the tension ramps up again because they can't get the hard drive plugged. It's just, it sets the tone from what's been going with the film and stuff like that. It just continues to be like, oh, it's not over yet. We've still got more to go, and it's becoming even more impossible as far as the mission is concerned. But yeah, like you said, like this film, the stunts get bigger, the set pieces get bigger, even the drama towards the end of the film gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's just the natural progression of the franchise, and it does calm down a little bit in the next film. We'll talk about the next film in a week's time, but for this film, they managed to find a really good balance of entertaining action film that doesn't overwhelm you, that keeps you in the loop and keeps you entertaining, keeps you on the edge of your seat with its drama, with all of its pacing, with its action.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's through the characters as well, to be honest. I think by the time you get to the Burj Khalifa scene, we've had like pretty nice character development scenes between the likes of Renner and Cruz. We know that Paula Patton's character has her own agenda. There's a lot of good scenes between Cruz and Simon Pegg as well. So we get to see quite a lot in the build up to the set pieces, which I think helps a lot, especially and also I think when you just get to the end of this one, even in the third one, spoiler alert, but like I guess he dies and comes back to life. He basically almost walks off after that. This is the first one I think where you see him, and he actually looks knackered at the end of it.
Yeah.
Like when he presses that button, and then he has to repress the button 15 seconds later, and then he falls back onto his back. He's like, that's the first time you actually think, yeah, you're living a tough life, Ethan.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought of that too, actually. And he is collapsed, and the Russians find him. And one thing I love that is that the villain just does the one final look over his shoulder, like, oh,
Yeah.
just stop it. Which again is part of that sort of circle of failure that they all have. And talking characters, I mean, let's stick with Ethan Hunt. One thing I want to talk about this. So I think it's the same for any of these. I don't want to just compare it to Bonds. I don't know many of the spy sagas, whatever you want to call it, but when you have these, I guess, iconic characters, which is probably a better term, and we get a film of them where it's their most personal one yet, unless it's Dominic Toretto, where it always is, and
Family now.
you have that in the first one, then you get a generic action film in the second. Third one, personal, wife, relationship. Fourth one, let's head more back to the action thing, and I like that. Okay, they've stuck more to the action. People could argue, but because I think Ethan Hunt had so much of a character arc in the last film, you didn't need it in this. And I know it's a lot easier having watched the film that Jude is actually alive at the end of it, that she wasn't bumped off screen, which would have been very weird watching that if I'd have seen the other three. But like, wait, so they just killed his wife off camera between films like that? I don't know how that would have gone down for people at the time until it got to the ending, but it's really interesting that maybe there's not more of his character progression, but I feel the team dynamic is what makes this film and really starts to put it back into that other way. And one thing I just want to say about before we talk about the team is Tom Cruise himself. So in the third film, we spoke that there's a lot of CGI in that third film. And we know that, again, Tom Cruise in 2022, everyone say, what's he doing? What mad stunt is he going to do this time? What's he going to do? Okay, train off a cliff, hanging on. Brilliant. It wasn't always the case with the Mission Impossible ones, and even this one today. I mean, I'm not saying they blow up the Kremlin in real life. We'll leave that for the actual people fighting. But Tom Cruise would probably want to actually be running away from the Kremlin blowing up if he could. I'm not saying he's a patriot by any means. But there's a lot of CG. But what I find the big thing here, and this is what I'm really curious with the Burj Khalifa stunt, one of the reasons why he starts a lot more of his own stunts in this film is because it gave Brad Bird the creative freedom with the camera to basically frame the shots. And I'm going to assume it's the Burj Khalifa because the character's climbing a building, the tallest building in the world, and it's a stunt double. You're not going to basically be able to shoot sort of half of their body because it's not Tom Cruise every time, and they can't make those masks like they pretend to do in these films. And it's really interesting that, and part of me wonders, is this the point of not his career, because he's done a lot of action, he's done a lot of stunts himself. But I wonder if this is the first film where maybe he got that, not adrenaline kick, because he obviously liked climbing rocks in Mission Impossible 2. But I think this is the sign of Tom Cruise heading into the Tom Cruise of today. That it was this film, it was doing that stunt, and it was maybe that freedom. Maybe he enjoyed it more, I don't know. Maybe it was just quite as simple as it gives them more freedom to shoot around me, which you think about it, it really, really does. And I guess it pushes him as an actor to do more of those physical things. But what are your thoughts on that stunts? Because interestingly, we know a few people, Behind the Stunts is a really good YouTube channel where they speak about things such as this, where maybe it shouldn't. I mean, when it's professionally trained stunts people versus actors doing it. So it's a really interesting debate and discussion. But just what are your thoughts on this one in particular with that Burj Khalifa stunt?
Yeah, this is the one. This is the kind of timeline where we enter where he's going to be filming a film in space, where he basically gets to choose what stunts and what kind of things he gets to do in the future. And I guess, we'd spoken about it in the previous films as well, like, has he been bitten by the bug yet? Kind of, does he want to do that stunt in real life? Is he going to take that away from kind of the other stunt performers who are kind of doing his job for him? And with this film, because there's a little bit more creative freedom coming from Brad Bird, and he's a little bit more flexible with kind of, how things are shot, who he wants in each scene and stuff like that I'm sure Tom Cruise would have possibly made the suggestion of, like, we need you to climb a building from the outside. And he goes, okay, why don't we do it like in the tallest building in the world or something like that? I have no idea how the conversation would have gone with Tom Cruise and the writers. I don't know if they turned around to him and said, hey, we want you to go and climb the tallest building in the world, or we're going to get your character to climb the tallest building in the world. He goes, no, I'll do it myself, kind of thing. But either way, I mean, you can imagine it going like that in a conversation, can't you? Like, he would just kind of put the idea forward, no, I'm doing it, and they're like, oh, cool, okay, sure, why not? But I mean, yeah, he's crazy, Tom Cruise. We know now down the line he'd do anything, any of the stunts put forwards before him. But I'd love to kind of go back and see some interviews at the time and just kind of see his thought process about kind of whether it was his idea, whether it was suggested to him, or whether there was a combination of the two in there.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, if you look, I think the success of this one probably dictated what happened after. Where, I mean, if you look at what Cruise and McQuarrie are saying now, I guess off the back of that one and the back of Rogue Nation and moving into Dead Reckoning, where they're almost choosing the stunts and then building the plot around the set pieces. And I guess the success of this one created that idea in his head to go away and do that and use that as a selling point for the film. I guess his name, I guess for one, star power is not a massive thing anymore, but it still does work. Clearly, Top Gun Maverick was a beneficiary of that. So his name being on it and the fact that he does those things. If he didn't do those things, yeah, I think it would absolutely take. I know it takes away from actual stunt performance, but it would take away from the box office of the film. I'm sure it would if he didn't do the stuff.
And kind of just sort of with that as well, last thing I'll say before we talk about the team, just the poster as well, him on the Burj Khalifa, that wouldn't feel the same if you didn't know he hadn't done that stunt. You'd think, they've just CGI'd him onto someone else. And I like the fact we know it's him. And again, that picture I mentioned at the start of just him sat on the building. We'll talk about a little more for the big sequence, but yeah, it is fascinating his approach to this and maybe what this one did do moving forward. And kind of talking the team as well. We mentioned Benji earlier, now a field agent, great little joke. And I think we spoke about Mission Impossible 3. Benji in that film isn't the Benji from this. Very different.
No.
And I've got to give him credit for a series of films where, aside from Ving Rhames, no one really comes back. Bringing Simon Pegg into the fold, and I think this is maybe the Brad Bird side of things, and of course Tom Cruise. He'd have been the one that said, yes, we can bring him in. But they absolutely nailed it. And of course, he did Star Trek in between these with J.J. Abrams again. I'm not familiar with old Star Trek, but I know how well he was immediately received with playing Scotty as well. I absolutely love him in this, and I actually think making him a field agent is one of the best things this series has done. And the one thing I think they lacked, of course, the first film, you kill off the team, you turn it into a Tom Cruise series. What they've evolved with better is more of that team dynamic, that Tom Cruise is still the main guy, but we enjoy spending time with the other people he's around. And I kind of wanted to ask you both about Paula Patton in this, because I really like her in this film. And we spoke on the Mission Impossible 3 review of Maggie Q. A lot of these supporting actresses in these films, I don't want to say been hard done by, because that's sort of unfair. But aside from, oh dear me, that's how on earth I've got Rebecca Ferguson. Aside from, we've had none of them returning, and I don't think that's a fault of any actress. I just think it's, again, they were still figuring out what they want to do with this. It never became a Bond girl type thing. We bring in a new girl each film. It's an agent he'll get with that. I know the second one did that. Obviously, glad the third is about the marriage. And I really like Paula Patton in this film. And I'm not saying I'd take her over Rebecca Ferguson any day in this series, but it's a shame we didn't get more from her. And kind of, you mentioned earlier, Theo, as well, with the anime stuff, she has her own character arc. And I really enjoyed her. I think these films, again, they've not nailed down the female characters. Such they just haven't been able to bring them back and develop them maybe a little bit further. And who knows what the last two films are going to do? We're bringing back characters from the first Mission Impossible haven't been seen in 27 years on screen, which is remarkable. But just what are your thoughts on Paula Patton? We'll talk about Jay Marine after, because I've got to talk about the what I found out in the lead up to this.
Yeah, just in general, it's nice that they're able to bring in a slightly different team each time, and it's always fun to see, reoccurring characters. I know that Ving Rhames is kind of in the background. He's in one scene in this film. He's just kind of introduced, and that's it. But he's been a constant throughout the series, appeared in every single film so far. So, that kind of makes sense from that perspective. But to have another kind of continuity character being carried over, and to actually develop his character with Benji, actually have him do something and become not just the comic relief, but actually be useful in the field as well. It's good groundwork for the films, and it means that you'll have attachment towards the characters, which, shall we say, they may be abusing that attachment towards characters in the latest films. I guess we'll have to find out. But it allows us, as part of a series, to get to know these characters and understand them from a deeper perspective. It's always fun to have new characters introduced, like Jane's introduced with Paula Patton in this film, and we can then kind of learn about them for this one film. We can get their character arc, we can learn their backstory, we can see, what influence they have over the story, and then we don't have to ever see them again. And that's fine. That's okay. But it's also nice to see, on the other side of things, those continuity characters you come back for, characters that you can get attached to, and ones that you can develop over a longer story. So I'd say from kind of the characters themselves, they've been very, very well directed, and they're very well written into this film. The fact that you can have a character like Benji who's carried over from a different film, kind of developing his character further, the fact that you have Tom Cruise's character himself developed throughout the entire film, and then you have characters like Jane and Brant who come in for just this film, and they have complete character arcs and their own character stories along with the plot going on in the background. It's very, very well put together.
Yeah, I think you could argue. I mean, this is the first film, the first Mission Impossible film, really, that makes a character that's not, or characters that aren't just Ethan Hunt, not disposable. I guess they are fleshed out. It does work. I think what you're saying about Paula Patton as well. I really like Paula Patton in this. I know that what you're saying is absolutely right in terms of female characters being underserved in the franchise up until this point, and then really up until Rebecca Ferguson came in and made herself just absolutely indispensable. Really. But again, I'd still love to see Paula Patton's character back. I actually thought because her arc, it's not that sealed, I guess, because obviously you have the issue of Hanaway and the fact that she does blame Ethan Hunt for that happening. Like, I thought maybe that could be something that reared up and she might become an adversary to Hunt maybe in like one of the later ones. I guess that's absolutely not going to happen now. But again, like you said, that they can come in as long as the character is fully fleshed, and we, I guess for these type of films, we care if they die or not, then that's really all that matters, because they have 2 hours to serve themselves to us, I think. And especially from Simon Pegg's point of view as well, we'd seen his character in such a different light before in the third one, to then come back in this one, and I guess that's definitely what you're saying, the Brad Bird effect of him being the everyman, and like with the quips, but like you said, not just be the comic relief, like actually serve a purpose, even if all of his tech does break.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and kind of let's talk Jeremy Renner, Brant in this film. Arguably, would we say he's the biggest name on paper to join the Mission Impossible series? Contextually, I know that Avengers hadn't come out yet, but he'd been in The Hurt Locker, he'd been in a lot of films. I think this is around the time of the Jeremy Renner boom, right? We had Avengers, then we had for some reason, the Bourne films.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just as he was Oscar nominated as well, I think. So that checks out, I think.
I will try and say this as sort of best I can. I like him in this film, but you don't bring on. I mean, you have the same scoff, right? When like, this is our chief analyst, like, yeah, but that's Jeremy Renner. It's not a chief analyst. And I know it does that great, but I also love Tom Wilkinson in this, that great cameo, and he actually gets killed 5 seconds after he gives the mission out, which is an insane deep cut on the classic. This will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Now, what I've been reading Jeremy Renner of this, and again, like many reports, unconfirmed. I'm sure they'll never confirm this. The introduction of Brant was to eventually replace Ethan Hunt and make Jeremy Renner the lead of the Mission Impossible series. Now, again, I guess we've got to go contextually. 2010, Paramount's thinking, there's only been 3 of these films. Is the 4th one going to be a hit? Here's a up-and-coming actor that's about to join a big franchise, left, right, centre. And this is not the Tom Cruise of today. This is the Tom Cruise becoming that Tom Cruise once more. It's quite hilarious 10 years on, thinking there was a long-term plan to replace Tom Cruise in the series. Now, being completely honest, it's very understandable that there was a long-term plan. That if Tom Cruise didn't want to do Mission Impossible films, they wouldn't be making them. It'd be maybe under his production banner, but it wouldn't be him involved. So I don't discount the idea of not having Ethan Hunt lead the series. Of course, Mission Impossible was TV way before it was a film as well. There's just something sort of tragically poetic that they sort of almost thought that Renner could replace Tom Cruise. Nothing against Jeremy Renner. And at times with this, again, I like the character of Brant. It does feel forced. I'm not trying to compare it to like any other franchises. I don't know what franchises might be comparisons where you brought on like a support with a long term view to be the lead. It doesn't happen
The
often.
Bourne franchise.
But and you just can't replace who was there before. Like it'd be like, let's not kill Sean Bean in Goldeneye, and Sean Bean's going to replace Pierce Brosnan. If he has enough, and it's quite insane when you really think about it. But um, again, it's laughable in the year 2022, not so much in 2011, which is when it came out. And I am curious by it, and I guess we got to say once again, pre-Avengers. Yes, he'd cameoed in Thor, but everyone forgets before the Avengers came out, they were making money. They weren't the biggest films of each year. There wasn't the biggest franchise in the world until the Avengers came out. The Avengers came out, outgrossed Dark Knight Rises by a couple of $100 million, and everyone realized, hold on, this cinematic thing makes money, which has completely changed the landscape. And of course, he would come back in Rogue Nation, wasn't in Fallout. I'm going to assume he's not in Dead Reckoning with obviously the accident last year. Even if there was a part, I bet that probably would have happened. But what are your thoughts on him in this film? Because again, I don't mind him, but it doesn't. Not saying he's not a team player. Is the only part of the team aspect, but that's because they're setting him up to be an individual, right? I don't know if I'm just waffling now.
I mean, he was brought in, right, as this character possibly to replace Tom Cruise. It's really unusual because he was not a big name, but like you said before, he was a name coming into this film. It wasn't like an unknown actor or actress who hadn't been in much before, like, dare I say, with, Paula Patton. I'd have a look through her list of films. The only one I could see on there which I actually recognized was Precious. Like, there's a few in there. I think she had a cameo role in Hitch or something like that. Like, it's not a big actress name who's been through a lot of films before you get your kind of big film coming up. Yeah, it's an unusual one, and I completely understand it. I completely understand bringing in someone younger, fitter, who could maybe do the stunts and almost screen testing them for the role, see how the film goes, and hey, if it goes ahead, it goes ahead. But I find it fascinating because as soon as I saw that written on the kind of the docket of what we would go through on this video, I immediately searched up and went, hold on. When did the Bourne Legacy come out? Because I was thinking, well, it would have been around about the same time. Did they watch the Bourne Legacy and go, we want him to be our new franchise star, and move forward with that? Or, did the Bourne Legacy watch this film or kind of keep an eye on production of this film and go, oh, actually, we want him as our legacy franchise star? And funnily enough, it's about the same time that both productions kind of started, which is really interesting. And, I think Bourne film's production was delayed, so it released 1 year later. Was it delayed because of the acting choice they went for? I'm not quite sure. I'll have to do a little bit more research on that. But I find it very interesting that they did have this backup plan to bring in Jeremy Renner as the new franchisee, and I think he would have done a fine job of it. I don't think it would have been anywhere near as good, and I think now the big draw is Tom Cruise. People go to see, I mean, his character's called Ethan Hunt. Everyone knows just Tom Cruise. Like, it's just Tom Cruise doing
Bond.
stunts, and it's not Bond. No, it's not like oh, I'm going to see Daniel Craig because he only plays that one character. Like, it's weird. It's the same with almost every single kind of Tom Cruise film. He has that kind of status along the lines of like Christopher Walken. Like, you can't name a single Christopher Walken character. It's just Christopher Walken. Like, it's that kind of aura that he gives off, set for the action genre. So in the long term, you could look back at it and you go, what an insane idea. Why on earth they think that? But I'm guessing at the time it would have made complete sense to have that backup plan. I mean, he's getting old now, isn't he? But he's still doing the stunts. It's an odd one. I think the only real life kind of way you could see it in the same way is Tom Brady. If anyone knows Tom Brady, American footballer who played well into his 40s when he really shouldn't have, because he was still winning. He was still, bringing in the money, still winning titles and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you take Renner just from this film, I get what you're saying about slightly jarring element, I guess, when he's introduced as chief analyst. Because I mean, that basically gives away the slight twist you get in the film. I mean, whether anyone would be shocked by that or not, of Michelle Monaghan's character not being killed off screen. I don't think anybody really thought she was dead. But it gives away the twist, really, that you see it's Jeremy Renner, and you're like, well, you're not going to be on the sideline of this entire film, are you? Like if it was an actor that was maybe unrecognizable. Although I guess that most people going to the cinema back in 2011 probably didn't really know who Jeremy Renner was. I mean, The Hurt Locker wasn't a massive box office success. I guess people that were like really into film would know who he was. But again, yeah, they maybe were banking that he would become a box office star. But yeah, no one's outshining Cruise, I don't think.
Absolutely not. And kind of let's talk the villains. Well, I say villains. There's a main villain, but we'll talk about these today as well. But the main villain of this Hendrix, anyone knew the name? Played by Michael Novist, who most people, I can't pronounce the Swedish, so no apologies. Most people will know as the villain from John Wick. Who gave one of the greatest speeches in modern cinema, one of the greatest monologues in modern cinema. I don't want to say he's wasted in this film at all. I think, how do you follow up Philip Seymour Hoffman in Mission Impossible 3? You kind of can't. And I think one thing the Mission Impossible series has had a real issue with, aside from Philip Seymour Hoffman, is having a villain that's like not already a rogue spy as such, and having a sort of rogue politician doesn't help. And also, the investment, for me at least, maybe I'm a man, if people think he's a great villain, then let me know. The only thing I can really say I liked about this was the concept of his suicide at the end, that he thought he'd die with the plans to make sure that his plan works, blah, blah, blah. But also, you see him at the start of the Kremlin scene, not when Tom Cruise sees him. He is there from the very get-go. And because I knew it was the John Wick villain now, I was like, oh, it's him. And then you realise that he's actually been with them the entire time, which is a great little, I've noticed this in the lead up to this big reveal later on. But I don't really have anything to say on the villain. But you know what? Bond films, you want a great villain. Spy films, you want great villains. But sometimes I'm so invested in maybe the heroes, when I'm invested in the story, the stunts, I don't particularly care for the villain. And I don't think there's enough source material for anyone to have played that role probably any different to what it was. It's a very generic, I'm going to, end the world to make things better. And I guess that's the difference, is when you're going from a personal spy, not family film, but, like the last one, you're going from a very personal stakes film. When it's personal, like Silver in Skyfall, you need a performance that can benefit from that. When it's I'm the generic supervillain of the week, you're always going to lose that. Doesn't matter who you cast, you're going to lose that. And I've got nothing to say. And if I'm being honest, the same for Léa Seydoux. She's had an incredible career since, and it'll be, I guess, a role. Pretty incredible ending, by the way, getting kicked out of the Burj Khalifa. Great way to go. But aside from that, I very much think that as the years will go by, like what we spoke about, Kara Russell, obviously she didn't get fridged in this film, Léa Seydoux, but it's someone that's careers blossomed so well after. You thought, they were underused, weren't they? But then again, if it was today, she should have been Inspector in No Time to Die, so you wouldn't cast her in another spy film, would you?
Yeah, I feel like this is the one area of the film where it could have really improved upon, like, heavily. I mean, dare I say, the big threat from this film isn't the villain itself. It's what the villain has or is trying to get. It's the MacGuffin is the big threat, basically, instead of it being the villain itself. And as good as Michael Nyqvist is, like, in his role, like, he doesn't really have much to say. He kind of delivers the lines and does the performance how you could throw anyone into that role. You genuinely could. You could absolutely throw anyone into that role, and I don't think it'd make a difference, because he's not given much to do in the entire film. A couple of, action set pieces, especially towards the end, couple of lines of dialogue. Apart from that, it's not much. It's spy work. You don't really see, what goes on behind the scenes. You just you focus so much on the hero's team story and stuff like that, and the dynamics of that, trying to change the situation, that you don't really have to focus on the villains too much. And like you said, with Léa Seydoux as well, like, it's a great introduction to her character at the start of the film. And then after that, there's nothing really. I couldn't name a single other scene other than her dying, throughout the entire rest of the film. It's a bit of a kind of nothing performance, and she's just there as, like, kind of henchwoman who could be a threat, but you know that because she's a henchwoman, she's obviously going to die in the end, and it's quite a brutal death. It's yeah, it's like that one part of the film. Even when the villains get kind of defeated at the end, the tension comes not from the villains themselves, but from the fact that they've pressed the big button to stop everything, and the time is still ticking down. Kind of that's what this film feels like. You can get rid of the villains out of the way, and there's still a bigger threat still looming. So yeah, I guess that's kind of how I feel about both those characters.
Yeah, I actually think that the two-dimensional element of the villains actually helps it a little bit because we've got so many hero characters to get to know and so many new characters to get to know. Even like Benji, for example, I think for most people going into this, they wouldn't have even remembered him in the third one because he's not in it that much. And this is a whole new take on him. So I think we've got so many new characters to learn. I think having at least Michael Knight listed as a villain with a strong face who can make strong facial expressions sort of does the job for everyone, and it enables us to sort of be with Paula Patton's character and Jeremy Renner's character and Tom Cruise and like go through what they're going through rather than just not really having time in the film to build a strong villain for them to play off against because I don't think it's really needed because I think the set pieces sort of take care of that on its own.
No, that's absolutely fair. And you are right, that 2 dimension does let you focus on the others. And there's nothing worse than a villain they've tried to sort of develop and there's nothing there to go off, which I think could have been the worst thing. And it will be interesting to see what they do with Dead Reckoning Part 1 because there's not much that's come out about the story, but there's a lot of talk on, I think, is Antonio Banderas in it as well? There's like some big names in there, but they're all talking about the villain that apparently it's going to be, not generic PR line, the greatest mission yet, but it's a two-parter. You'd hope, don't need a Thanos, but if it's a two-parter, you hope there's a villain that's going to be there for 2 films, potentially. But kind of moving aside from that, let's talk the score. Michael Giacchino, the first composer to do 2 Mission Impossible films until Lorne Bell does Dead Reckoning when that's out in a month. Worked with Brad Bird previously. Incredibles, Ratatouille, done loads of Pixar films. I love the score to this. Now, with the Mission Impossible films, I think aside from Fallout, there aren't. I basically I've been listening to them. I've been going for walks pretty much after, so I can listen to them in isolation. Now, one thing I say about Michael Giacchino, when it comes to not old intellectual properties, he's very good at taking inspiration from what precedes it. Certainly, Jurassic World will be one people talk about. But just of his whole career, he's done stuff like Star Trek really well, Mission Impossible. He goes back to the roots of the series, what made it work back in the day. And I just love his approach to this film. It's not the best score in the world, don't get me wrong. But when it needs tension, when it needs that, silence comes from just choosing not to place a score there. I do wonder sometimes, is that director's approach? Is that composer's approach as well? Is it between the two of them? Do they try things that some work, some don't? But I love this. It feels more like a Michael Giacchino score than the third film. It's got a bit of persona. When it's going to other countries, the cultural aspect of the soundtrack changes too. And the one thing he's very good at, which I don't think the other films have done, he will sneak in that Mission Impossible theme at the lowest, the most random moments. He does it a lot in the third film, in the intro at the house party, but certainly with this fourth film, there's some really good scenes, and it is down to Giacchino. And I just think, I wish he could have done more. I love the fact that by coincidence, J.J. Abrams and Brad Bird, 2 of the directors he's worked with the most over his career, were both there to... sorry, it's just made me realise when I went to Michael Giacchino concert, they're both on stage together. That's just clicked that loads of the Mission Impossible directors were there in that room. I didn't clock it. But yeah, just your thoughts on the score quickly, sorry. Because I know I'm listening to one on stage, so I don't expect others to, but it is interesting seeing how the music's evolved in this series leading up to the new ones.
Yeah, it's just a little kind of, few notes played from the theme every now and then in any setting that, you love to kind of hear, that kind of brings back that branding for the film and makes you, makes you go, oh yeah, I am still watching a Mission Impossible film, even if you listen to just the music for it. I found it actually blended into the background quite a lot throughout most of the film, and you can take that as a positive or a negative in various different places. I mean, sometimes in a film you want a big bombastic score. Sometimes you just want a score that kind of fits the film and just kind of blends in, and then you only notice it when it has those kind of little bits of kind of leitmotif coming through and everything like that. Just little notes and keys and stuff like that, or when it really needs to be big and bombastic, like a big scene, like him on the Burj Khalifa or, a car chase scene or anything like that where it really stands out because the action's ramping up. So I quite enjoyed the score. I enjoyed it more than, say, for example, Mission Impossible 2, which was way too over the top and very rocky. But I didn't really see too much of a difference between this film and Mission Impossible 3 personally.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think it does. It works nicely to build up tension to make you just be on the edge for when is the mission theme going to play. I think that's where it does. Obviously, the build up to the I guess the two biggest set pieces of the film is where it does that as well. But yeah, solid.
Last thing I'll say, any Michael Giacchino fans, I don't know if you're both familiar with the puns and all the titles for like every soundtrack of his. Even Rogue One, they let him release an alternate soundtrack listing where it's just puns. The best ones for this one, Give Her My Budapest, that's the name of one song. Kremlin with Anticipation. Where's the really funny one? Mission Impersonable. And the final one, World's Worst Parking Valet, which is obviously the last moment. I said, if anyone's unfamiliar with him, just look at his track names for his scores, let alone the actual quality of them. But yeah, moving, and it is the last film he scored, which is a real shame actually. I forgot who did Mission Impossible 5, but Lorne Balfe, of course, doing well. I'm guessing everyone doing creative on part 1's doing creative on part 2. I know they're not going to officially say it, but we all know they are. We've spoken a lot about the film. We're going to talk about some individual scenes. And kind of for this one, we've got some big sequences we're going to talk about. Now, we've spoke a bit about Burj Khalifa. That's like the big stunt. That's the overarching stunt. But we basically spoke about this is Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise. What are your thoughts on the actual set piece, how it fits into the story, the tension with it? Because the one thing I'll say this, and I always forget this with this film, when he first steps outside, okay, you get this amazing shot. But when you get the gloves, it feels too easy. And this is where that genius stuff comes in early, right? Of all the gadgets failing. The moment the one glove doesn't work and you realise that actually the tension is that Tom Cruise has got to climb this building with one glove, squeezing his body to the windows, however he wants to do it. I actually thought for climbing the tallest building in the world, there's a lot of ingenuity in there that I don't think many of the films would do. I think, I'm not saying The Rock would ever do this, but if this was a film of The Rock, right, it'd just be, or like, let's say Fast and Furious. They would just like climb to the roof and that would be it. There'd be nothing else happening. They just climb to, or maybe they'd drive down the side of the building following an explosion. Physics with the Hoover Dam. But what are your thoughts on the actual set piece itself? I know that obviously, I mean, I've put a few others in there, but this is the real, like, this is the big stunt moment. If you want to talk about this, anyone's welcome to bring up the others.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, before I go into the Burj Khalifa, I wanted to bring up the prison breakout scene because thinking back on that scene, that has to be the most kind of comedic Brad Bird scene that you could possibly think of to introduce the film, I guess. Like bringing in these characters and stuff like that. It's a lot of visual comedy, which you get a lot from kind of animated films and everything like that in the animated medium. So, having that as the reintroduction of Ethan's character and, those interactions between himself and Benji without actually talking and then having the fight sequence and everything like that. It's a great way to reintroduce the character, and also it brings in that comedic element, which, we were talking about before, which Brad Bird brings across. As far as the Burj Khalifa is concerned, I'll be perfectly honest, even when the gloves started to fail, this is one of the only stunts and scenes where I didn't feel any tension because he wasn't slipping every single time. I mean, dare I say, if, these films are kind of continuity and all that, continuation of all of them, we've seen him climb, free solo on a cliff at the start of Mission Impossible 2. So we know he's going to be able to do it. And also, dare I say, this is where kind of suspended belief and everything like that, we know that he's not actually climbing it without harnesses or anything like that attached. And even if the film makes us want to believe that he's doing it without harnesses, we know for a fact he's doing it with harnesses. And that's kind of where the issue of the stunt comes from for me. It's kind of believable in the setting of the film, but at the same time, you are not completely suspended within reality of like, oh yeah, sure. He's kind of being suspended there. He's got support, and we'd see him slipping a little bit more, and he doesn't look really like he's struggling. He looks like he's got it all in hand. The only struggle is him getting back into the building. That's kind of where I see the tension and the drama from it. I didn't get much tension and drama from that. And maybe that's because later down the line we've seen him do bigger and bolder stunts. I mean, the plane sequence where we know he's attached in, but Christ, he actually went off a moving plane, like taking off. And of course, in the new film, we're going to get that amazing sequence of him jumping off the cliff, and we've seen him behind the scenes. He's actually doing that. He's actually jumping off that. So maybe it's the later films with the stunts becoming bigger and better have spoiled that idea for me, but I just didn't feel as much tension in that scene as maybe I would have liked to.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there. I think from my point of view, I quite like the humour that's in all of the set pieces. Like even in the Burj Khalifa scene, you have the thing when the glove fails, and then if, a few minutes later the glove comes back and sticks to the outside and then falls off again. Like you're saying, I'm glad you brought up the prison break scene. I absolutely love that scene. Just the visual comedy when he's just pointing at the gate as if to be like, if you don't open this, then we're going to have an issue here. And even the sort of smaller ones, like right after the Kremlin blows up, when he wakes up in the hospital and he tries to climb out the window, and the police officers almost egging him on to do it, like to jump off.
Do you get a cigarette in that scene as well? Like he starts like waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just works. I think all of that works quite well. And you can say it does maybe pop the tension a little bit, but I think. I guess you do have to suspend belief because it's Tom Cruise and it's Ethan Hunt and that Ethan Hunt's not going to die.
And I think as well, kind of following that with Ethan Hunt stuff, I think even the Burj Khalifa scene, the build up to it, it's not this, Tom, you need to go into this, we'll do this. It's like, everything's not working. You got like 30 minutes, go now. And I think that works to its credit more, that it's rushed, whereas some of the other ones are very much, oh, there's a moving plane, we can't get in it. Tom Cruise is going to jump on the side of it. And that will be fun to talk about. And anyway, it's interesting. And for anyone that hasn't seen it yet, the 10-minute behind the scenes for Dead Reckoning they released with Avatar, do watch it on YouTube. I showed it to my dad, and he literally thought like Tom Cruise just turned up to set one day, went on a bike, jumped off, and opened the parachute. He thought that was it. And he didn't realize how much science goes into it, the months of planning, prepping, all that sort of stuff, which is really interesting. And it's interesting that the general public was shown that as a trailer, which I think is way more exciting for them to probably find out about, which shows the marketing of the film. It's about what's Tom Cruise doing, and this was it for that one. And kind of sort of following them as well. Do we each have a favorite scene? Tate, you go first.
Yeah, for this film, it's got to be the Kremlin projector scene. I guess the Kremlin scene in general. I know you've already spoken about the meme of the changing clothes and stuff like that, and that I do enjoy that meme. I have seen that meme a couple of times over, and it's starting to become a bit more popular now with Oppenheimer and Barbie coming out as well. But I'd say the projector scene as well, it's an amazing gadget that you can kind of believe within the world of Mission Impossible, and also kind of in the real world as well. You can kind of see that and try and think and get away with that, but it's also got comedic tension in there with Benji's face popping up and then kind of Tom just kind of pulling him back at the last second and holding him away. It's great even at the end of the scene where it starts to kind of bug out because there's more than one set of eyes on it and everything like that. It's just a very well put together scene. And then, of course, the end of that scene with the Kremlin blowing up as well, just kind of, it really sets the tension for the rest of the film based off that, because the stakes are really, really high from that point on.
Yeah, mine's actually just after the Burj Khalifa scene when Cruise is running and he's chasing after Michael Nyqvist and he goes into the sandstorm. I absolutely love that bit.
Excellent. Oh, God, it's hard picking this because there's so many great scenes. I don't want to go with the Burj Khalifa because it seems too obvious, but I really do like the prison scene as well because, I mean, you got to think contextually, and this is what I know they didn't. I mean, the Mission Impossible 3 intro we spoke about in the video last week, which was this character's not been around for 6 years. It's not Bond. There's no big pre-title sequence, but it was Philip Seymour Hoffman with Ethan Hunt tied up in a chair. Like, what the fuck's going on? Then the film starts. And I like the fact of this one, and I know they've done it a bit more since, but I like the fact that it feels like there's been a gap. Let's reintroduce this character we've not seen for a few years. I think the prison scene's a great way of doing it, and to its credit, later on in the film, there's a payoff for that it is actually involved in the story. It is part of another mission they're working on. And I do like that they weave into that. It's maybe not my favourite scene, but scene we haven't spoke about, I want to sort of put here instead. The Tom Wilkinson cameo as the new head of the IMF. I love this whole setup that he's going to go undercover. He's got this one chance. He's going to get the new mission. This new mission is to prove that it wasn't him. And it ends horrifically with the Russians massacring them all. That would start a war. I'm not going to get into the logistics of real life war and possible missions, but I just love the thing that I read that he gets shot 5 seconds after he basically finishes the mission briefing, which, if that's intentional, then fair play for making that intentional. But we had Anthony Hopkins in Mission Impossible 2. We've had Tom Wilkes in this. I'd be very curious to see who the new head of the IMFs are going to be, because it seems to change every other film. And we know that Ron Swanson is going to be in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2. So fingers crossed for Parks and Rec, but to the nth degree. But heading into final thoughts as well, this has been a really good discussion. It's a film I love. And it's kind of tough when you enter this part of the Mission Impossible, where we're sort of 4 films into doing these now. Yes, there's only 6 films in the series, but it sort of becomes this James Bond-esque thing where there's just so much fun to be had with so many of them. It gets harder to compare them to one another. But what they have now took on is an identity of their own. And I think, even retitling it to Ghost Protocol and calling it Mission Impossible 4, it gives a sense of persona to each individual film as another episodic, well, not episodic, but another installment of a Mission Impossible. And I think Ghost Protocol delivers with where the series is going to go. It clearly not just relaunched it, it had audience invested in it, it had critics invested in it, the public, everything. And it's put it, like 3, this upward trajectory of where that series is going to continue to go. And even heading into the next couple of weeks, we don't know how big Dead Reckoning is going to be. You said that if we think it's going to be the biggest one. I'm with you on that. I think it absolutely will be. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it all wraps out. But for me, it's a pretty great blockbuster. And that sounds like a low compliment. It's not. If a film like this came out today, I think audiences would be yearning for it. I think it didn't come out at the wrong time. But I just think the last 10 years, there's been a very specific theme or genre or style of production that I think audiences have missed out on. And it's now what the audiences are starting to want to see again. And I think Ghost Protocol is actually a film that maybe myself, alongside others, might have took for granted when it did come out.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that one. I know at the start I said I really, really enjoyed Mission Impossible 3, and it's probably my favourite Mission Impossible film. But this is a better blockbuster. I wouldn't say it's a better film, but it's definitely a better blockbuster. It's got better action in it. It's got more set pieces and everything like that. And it's a funner action film to watch. Saying that, I would still prefer Mission Impossible 3 from the story standpoint and everything in there.
But that's what's great though, right? You've got 2 completely different films that you're each going to get the best things out of both.
Exactly. And with this film, you do get a lot of comedy and humor. You get the action. You don't get the villains per se, but like Theo said, it kind of works in that way. You can have the villains not really do anything, be anything, just be in the background causing the threat, and the focus then goes onto the team, and that's where this film shines. So I really enjoy it. I really do. I wouldn't know where to place it in Mission Impossible films ranking if we were to go around and do that, but no, I think it's a solid film. It got massive amounts of positive critical acclaim, and also did well at the box office, so you can't really fault it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Without this more than solid effort, you don't get what we've had in the last 5 or 6 years from this franchise, which is you don't often see a franchise get that upward trajectory ever, really. Even take Bond for an example. That's ebbed and flowed. This has sailed through now for 15 years. So I don't think you can knock what Brad Bird did on this for that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And with that, that's going to round out this review. So that's going to do it for Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And as always, we do want to hear from you at home. So please do comment your thoughts if you haven't already. If you're not on the premiere, you can comment it. We'll reply to those. And yeah, if you're a fan of Brad Bird, maybe we need hashtag justice for Brad Bird or something. A filmmaker that should be making big blockbuster films, unlike certain ones which keep having insane fan campaigns on social media. Thank God we're never going to get that Mission Impossible film. It'll just be black and white, painful. But aside from that, there's a lot of other things happening on the channel. But these Mission Impossible reviews are going to be going on every single Tuesday. Next week's going to be Rogue Nation. Another great thumbnail. This time it's Tom Cruise on the side of an aeroplane. Cannot fault what the poster team did for that. The easiest poster to ever make in mankind, and that is your main stunt for that film. So do join us next Tuesday for that. Theo, we have your socials up on the screen as well now. So you've been doing a lot of stuff recently. Of course, you do a lot of film stuff as well. I've seen you doing some tennis talk as well for Radio Times. Twitter at Theo Fisher 82, Letterboxd at Theo Fisher. Not a why should people follow you type thing, but what else are you up to?
I've got, I mean, film and TV wise, I mean, I've just seen Asteroid City, so I'm hoping to get a review out for that in the next couple of days. But other than that, it'll be for anyone interested in Wimbledon. I'll be doing a few Wimbledon pieces for the Radio Times in the lead up to that in a few weeks. So yeah, check it out.
Excellent. So people, please do follow Theo. You've been coming on and off the channel for years now. It's always great to get you back on. And I wanted you on for this. We watched Top Gun Maverick together last year, which was still one of the most insane cinematic experiences of my life. That room was just insane. So yes, everyone follow Theo on there as well. I feel like there's more Mission Impossible stuff to. The fact we're 4 in now at 6 is quite scary. I think with Bond it went on for 6 months, which I understand, but yeah, we're already on Rogue Nation. That's crazy to think about. Tayte, I feel like dates are everywhere. What else is coming up? There's a few big blockbusters. It's blockbuster season. Am I missing something? I don't know.
I mean, depends. At the time of this recording, we've got a lot of films coming out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, to the point where I have, for the first time in a few years, repurchased my Cineworld card just so I'm able to keep up, basically, with what's coming out. So I guess keep your eyes peeled. We're going to be putting all of our stuff up on our socials, and we'll be letting you know as and when various different, spoiler reviews, spoiler-free reviews for all of the big franchises, all of the big summer films coming out. So please keep an eye on our socials for all of those.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you both for coming on tonight. It's been a great discussion. And as I said, this series will return next week. So take care, and we'll see you on the next one.
Appreciate it, guys.